and is something that perhaps some recent American policymakers did not fully assimilate. It should follow, therefore, from that, not as a matter of surprise, that the crisis of leadership, of American leadership in the world, the ongoing crisis, could become the crisis of global stability. Because, yet there is another consideration to bear in mind, that despite Schadenfreude about the domestic problems in the United States, or about the loss of respectability for American global leadership, it is a fact that no state, no single state, nor any combination of states can in the foreseeable future replace the linchpin role that the United States continues to play in the world. And if anybody had any doubt about it, and there were some countries which in recent weeks expressed Schadenfreude at our internal difficulties, then look at the collective global pilgrimage to Washington in the course of the last week. Because everybody knows that that is where the only possible decisions for recovery can be made, and everybody knows that if there's no recovery over there, there will be no recovery anywhere else. So in that sense, the central role of the United States in the world affairs is still there, despite all of the difficulties, despite some of the loss of respect or effectiveness. And it also means that the monumental task facing the new American president in the realm of foreign policy, beyond dealing with the immediate financial crisis, is to regain global legitimacy for the United States by spearheading a collective effort for a more inclusive global system of management. A more inclusive system of global management. That has to be the task of the United States at this historical era. And in my own view, four little but strategically pregnant words define the essence of the needed response of the new American president about to assume office. It is to unify, to enlarge, to engage, and to pacify. Let me speak briefly to each of these words, and then we can perhaps have a discussion, because I know that's an important part of this undertaking. To unify, in my judgment, pertains particularly to the needed sustained effort, energetic effort, serious effort, to generate truly shared decision-making between the United States and the European Union, and also in NATO. And how to achieve that is, of course, a long-standing objective, but one which has to be pursued with intensified urgency, given the present circumstances. To me, it means both formal and informal, regularized, top-level consultations between Europe and America, something that's needed, particularly in the light of what has transpired over the last 8 years. But of course, it's much easier to state this than to accomplish it. And one of the very major reasons for that is something of which we over there and you over here are very well aware. Namely, there is no such thing yet as a politically unified Europe. And the absence of such a politically unified Europe creates real complications in the process of revitalizing, reestablishing, and making central a renewed transatlantic dialogue. What then, in that context, is a viable alternative? One can seek it, of course, in the institutional arrangements, the Treaty of Lisbon, and so forth, but that doesn't deal with political realities. The political reality is of intra-European divisions on some key strategic issues, and great disparities of power among the various components, sovereign components of the European Union. And hence, in this context, what is practicable in the near future is essentially a more deliberate dialogue between three European countries that have a global orientation and to varying degrees global interests, and obviously That is the UK, France, and Germany. But that dialogue, in turn, can only be effective and be meaningful if the three have a basic, fundamental, strategic consensus among themselves. And one of the problems of the last 8 years, irrespective of our own shortcomings in foreign policy, is that there was no European partner for the United States for us to take seriously and to give us honest advice and to try to share common courses of action. We had a very loyal ally, a close personal ally in the country with which we have the greatest kinship, namely this country. But if there is responsibility for the war of unfortunate choice that we undertook to wage, it has to be shared precisely with that partner, who publicly defended it vigorously, privately advocated it, even if at the same time whispering some reservations or making alternative suggestions, which could be safely ignored because the public praise was what was important and it was pocketed and politically very useful. And the other two partners engaged essentially in differentiated competition in public denunciations of our policies, merited indeed, but always painful, and it wasn't conducive then to a serious dialogue. There was no dialogue, to be perfectly blunt about it, between President Bush and Chancellor Schroeder, nor was there much of a dialogue between President Bush and President Chirac, who in the process, incidentally, offended a good part of Europe by telling it to shut up when it was inclined to support the United States. So the basic need for the transatlantic dialogue is that there be, in some fashion, a political dialogue that carries weight and substance and entails respect from America and a willingness to share both in the decision-making and burdens on the part of the Europeans. And there is no alternative, it seems to me, for the moment, except for an informal arrangement between the three, if they can come to share a common strategic purpose. And that is something that the Europeans need to do, while we need to be more willing to engage in serious dialogue. Together, in spite of the relative decline of Atlanticist supremacy over the world, the fact remains that the US and the EU together account for more than 1/2 of the global GDP. And that is an enormous source of weight. But for us to be effective, we have to be willing to discuss strategic choices, and I'll come to some in a minute, and then be willing to undertake jointly the resulting burdens. Alas, for too many years now, the general pattern has been that we make the decisions and then expect the Europeans to share in the burdens. And for too many years, the European complaint has been that the Europeans are excluded from decision-making, but it should be the US that carries the heavy load. And there's no better example of that than the current problems that we face, and I'll come to them, in Afghanistan. It does occur to me that perhaps in the new US administration, the deliberate effort to revitalize at the highest level the American-European dialogue could be the task assigned to the Vice President, who has special expertise in foreign affairs, knows this continent well, is known by the elite. It cannot be a full-time job of the US President, and yet someone at the American end, at the highest level, has to be engaged in the deliberate promotion of it.